activity on rendering, and therefore make sure you have the Lecture 10 rendering activity downloaded and on your desktop, because we're going to need that. So if you go on FSO, Lecture 10, you'll see the rendering activity. Make sure you've got that. Oh, what's your last name? There you go. Thank you. All right. So, without further ado, we got to do what we do. We talk about stuff having to do with 3D. All right. So, let us talk about rendering and what exactly is that. Now, basically, rendering is math. It's all about calculation. And as you and I have come to know and love, Maya is basically an enormous calculator. It's got a very beautiful interface in terms of how we utilize it, but basically it's just an enormous calculator. And the rendering process is very similar to that. It is a monstrous amount of calculation. And what we're doing is we are calculating the behavior of materials in terms of transparency, translucency, opacity, color values, reflectance, all this stuff comes into play in terms of light behavior. But we're also counting and calculating polygons, and we're calculating animation, we're calculating sneezes. All these things are evaluated together mathematically. And then Maya, in conjunction with the rendering engine, they create an image for you to see. And that image is basically the computer drawing a picture for you. And that's what it's doing. The computer draws. So the reason I have that picture of a Polaroid up there is the rendering process works kind of like a Polaroid. Any of you guys remember Polaroid photography at all or have played with that at all? It's a good party gag, right? Because that stuff doesn't end up on the internet. But point being, in terms of taking pictures, you know, you take a picture with that thing and the little bit of film comes out, and then we have to like wait, because what happens is basically light enters to the lens, it's focused onto a plane, and then the light triggers the silver halide crystals, which are suspended in layers of gelatin, and the silver halide crystals react into various colors, and the depth at which the silver halide crystals sink into the gelatin give us the lights and the darks of our image. So there's sort of a process that happens. They kind of mix and churn and they do their thing, and that's why we have to wait for a Polaroid image to become visible, because it's doing its math effectively on a chemical level until we actually have an image. And eventually, you know, you blow on it and you shake it, and then you have an image. So rendering is much like that as well. The more math there is, the longer it will take. But basically, we're just creating an image, except that the computer is drawing it for you. And in terms of those drawings, we're all familiar with flip books, right? We talked about those before. A flip book is a series of images, and if you put them all together and you flip them at the right frame rate, you know, at least, you know, 8 to 12 frames per second, we create the illusion of animation due to a phenomenon called persistence of vision. But we perceive that it is moving and animated when in actuality it is just a series of still images moving in rapid succession. Well, when we create an animation in 3D, things that are moving, we're basically creating several images just like a flip book. So we're doing renders of still images, and then we put together like 24 of them, and then we have 1 second of animation if we're working off of a 24 frames per second frame rate. So basically your computer's drawing these pictures one at a time for you, and if it's in motion, obviously it's doing a lot of drawings for you. Now, just like in the real world or in the analog world, a simple drawing is easy to draw, very quick, right? I can draw a stick figure pretty fast because there's not a lot of detail there. Just like a very simple scene is easier and faster to render. A more complex drawing takes a lot longer to draw. When you have intense detail, it takes longer to draw that detail. The computer is the same thing. When you have a great deal of intense detail, it takes your computer longer to draw those images as well. Does that make sense? Get a hell yeah? Okay. Now, here's the cool / interesting thing about rendering. You didn't know it, but you have been working with renders ever since you launched Maya. Did you know that? Who knew that? You knew that. And you knew that. Now you're just jumping on the bandwagon. Because here's the thing. When I'm here looking at my Maya interface, right? There it is, launched, happy, and ready to do its thing. Hi, Maya interface. No, it's just getting ready. Maya's not one of those out of bed and on the go kind of things. It takes a second to get the sand out of its eyes and what have you. I'm an awake person. If I'm awake, I'm firing on all 12 cylinders as soon as my eyes open. Some people not so much. Maya's definitely a slumber cat. So in terms of Maya here, this interface that I'm looking at is a series of drawings. Every time I move my mouse and get nearer to or further from or change the angle of an object that I'm looking at, Maya is drawing me a picture of what I see. In fact, many pictures, because it has to make it look animated or make it look fluid and it's in motion. Does that make sense? So what's happening is, again, with not much to look at, something very simple, with not a very complicated drawing, right? Not a lot of lighting and shading values in there, it can draw it pretty quickly. So this is why we have this as a interface. This is what it looks like when we look at it, because we need things to move quickly, because we need the calculation to happen fast. So we have what we call a hardware render. And that's what we're looking at here when we're looking at Maya's interface. That's a hardware render. Not overly complicated, pretty simplistic, not a lot of detail, not a lot of lighting and shading information. We've got low number of polygons, but just like if you're playing a video game and there's a lot of stuff on the screen, and sometimes it can cause your screen to lag a little bit because you have a lot of really fun options turned on and a lot of cool graphics, and it's maybe a little bit too much for your machine. You get little lags in your game. The same thing happens to Maya. You know, if I had a 4 million polygon object on the screen here and I showed all the lighting that was going on and there were a bunch of textures on there, you would notice that Maya would begin to chug a little bit and have similar graphics issues as a result of having too complex to draw and can't do it quickly enough to give it that smooth, interactive appearance of motion. Does that make sense? Hell yeah? Okay. How about my digital friends? You guys on board? Come on, ride the train. Choo choo, ride it. All right, let's go. Good. So this is the rendering process. And previously, you guys noticed we were turning on the Arnold renderer. And the way we were doing that is, well, let's do this first. If we go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Render Settings, and we open up this window, this is where we kind of explain to Maya and whatever rendering engine we're using what kinds of images we want to create. How many of these images do we want to create? Are there any parameters to the quality of these images we want to create? All that stuff is housed within the render settings window. And in this window, you can indicate, you know, what renderer you want to use, you know, with this little drop down. And again, the hardware is going to look just like what you're looking at when you look at your Maya interface. And you can pick the various renderers. Now, if you click this drop down and you don't see Arnold as an option, what does that mean you need to do you think? You got to load it, right? Obviously, Arnold has not been loaded. So you got to make sure you load that in. And again, the process there is Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager. Make sure you go to the Plugin Manager. And then you're going to scroll down to the section that talks about the MTOA bundle, the Maya to Arnold bundle. Make sure you hit loaded and then refresh it. And then you'll have the ability to choose Arnold from your rendering options. But again, in terms of if you wanted to do different file types, if you wanted to do different numbers of files, if you wanted to name the images you're creating, and you can talk about all kinds of cool things. Something that you also very important, particularly for this class, is you can actually tell Maya what camera to render from, because you can render from virtually any camera, whether you made it or not. So just make sure when you're looking at your drop down, if there's a specific camera you're going to render from, you're going to have to tell it that in your render settings. All right, does that make sense? Did hell yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and the various tabs give you options on how you can alter the way the calculations are being made in order to create your image. And a lot of this is like quality control related stuff. How do I make my image look better? So this is where we play with those settings. All right, now that being said, we're going to do some rendering. I bet you never would have guessed that, but we are. So if you get your render 10 or your render 10, your lecture 10 rendering activity, and that's this guy right here. Let me see, make sure I got the right one. All right, you got to make sure you got, I'm going to put one on my desktop just so I can, I'm going to paste it right up on there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do a practice render. And what this is going to help us to do is our week 4 assignment 2 is very similar, like super crazy similar to what we're about to do. So if you can do this, you're going to be fine for your week 4 assignment 2. Does that make sense? Okay. So good idea to pay attention because this is worth, I don't know, what is that, Brian? About 15% of your grade or something crazy like that? 12? I knew it was pretty high. So again, this is it's a lot. So you definitely want to make sure you can do this. So best investment of your time is making sure you're paying attention because time is short. All right, so here we are at the activity. And again, what you're going to do is download this from the lecture 10 render activity. And then you double click it. And then you don't need that part. You can toss it out. And you'll notice that this render 10 lecture 10 render activity has all the file folders in there, including the workspace. So I don't have to create that, thankfully, but you and I both know the first thing I have to do is what? Set your project to that file folder, right? So make sure you do that because good things happen when we set our project. So I'm going to go to File, Set Project, and I'm going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to choose my lecture 10 rendering activity, set my project to that folder. And then now I'm going to go to File, Open Scene, and I'm going to select the render activity file. Incidentally, do you think it'll keep that name throughout, or am I probably going to change that? I'm going to change it. You know I'm going to change it, right? All the files that we turn in for this class, we don't leave them at the default name that it was given when we first opened it up. Make sure we change the names of everything. But so I've got this file open now. And what you will see is we've got this really cool scene that we've made for you already. And there's actually already an object in it, your buddy, the pepper mill. So what we're going to work on today is, well, how do I render this really cool scene, get a sample image, and play with the quality controls to improve the quality of my image? Now, what you'll notice right away is that there's actually a camera we would like you to utilize for rendering, and it's called the RenderCam, oddly enough. And you might be wondering, wow, can I make cameras? Absolutely. If you go to any window and go to its menu set, if you go to Panels, Perspective, New, you can make a new perspective camera and then name it something. You know, Maya's just going to give it a number, but you can call it whatever you want. In this instance, we called it RenderCam. So this is the camera we would like you to render from. And you'll notice if you look at this camera, it's got kind of a gray box around it here. And that is actually due to some of these controls that we have in here where we've set it up to create what we call a gate mask. And what's happening here is I'm showing you exactly what your render will encompass in terms of the image you create. Whatever is in this area, you will see. Whatever is in this gray area, you will not see. So just bear that in mind when you're trying to set up your shot. We're definitely going to do that today, and you will definitely do that for your week 4 assignment 2. Now, when you try to navigate within this camera, the very next thing you realize is I can't move my camera. It doesn't move. I've gotten some questions from students in the past who have asked me, hey, is it possible to lock attributes? Can I lock things so that they can't move or can't be messed with? Yes, you can. Is this camera locked? Yes, it is. Okay, so how do I unlock things? Let me show you. Because if you leave the camera at the default, I'll know you weren't listening to this part of the lecture. Naughty, naughty. So if you go to View, select Camera, you will select the camera in question that you are looking through at that juncture in time, and you'll see there's a little bit of a gray coloration here in the channels, and that's an indication that an attribute or attributes are locked. So what you're going to need to do is highlight that with the left mouse button. Just drag and highlight the words, not the numbers. Highlight the attributes, and then hold down the right mouse button, and you will see about 3/4 of the way down, there's lock and unlock. So what you want to do, obviously, is go to unlock, and then once you unlock those channels, now all of a sudden, I can move around in there and I can drive around that shot like any other camera that I can utilize in Maya. So make sure you do that. You will lose a lot of points if you don't unlock your camera. And again, I'm going to know you definitely did not do that first part of the lecture. Yes? Again, don't miss this. Working on other assignments is ill-advised. Not that I'm saying that's what you were doing, but make sure you're paying attention, because I catch at least 3 to 4 students every month on this one, and it's so easy. Not worth it. Highlight the attributes with your left mouse button. With the right mouse button, choose unlock. All right, so make sure you got that. All right, so now that I can fly around my scene any way I want, it's obviously easier to work with when it's shaded. What I want to do is come up with just sort of an interesting angle to kind of capture the object. And we've already put an object in there for you to work with, so you don't have to worry about that. That's easy, right? And this is what you're going to do basically for your week 4 assignment 2, is you're going to get this exact same scene, but it won't have the peppermill in it. It will have nothing in it. And then you're going to bring your objects into the scene. And you pick your 4 favorites. They have to be models, obviously, no blockouts. And they have to be 4 different models, but you're going to pick 4 objects and put them on this desk. And what I'd like you to do is imagine that the desk is kind of like a stage where you're showing off what you did. And the objects that you built over the span of this month are basically the characters in this play that we're creating. So you want to set them up on the stage in such a way that makes them interesting to look at. And next lecture, we're going to talk all about composition and how we can make our images look better. So for this assignment, not a huge deal, but be aware there are points associated with how well your final scene turns out. So you definitely want to make sure you're paying attention to that as well. So what I'm going to do here, again, is just pick something that looks relatively interesting, drive my camera around. And once I find something I'm pretty happy with, then it's time for me to go ahead and start doing some renders. Now, the good news is this scene has already been lit for you, so you don't have to mess with the lighting at all. In fact, I'd prefer you didn't. But if you know, like a moth to a flame, if you can't stand not touching things, and I get that, do yourself a huge favor and make sure you save your scene, render out a final image, do everything that you have to do for this turn-in first so that you have something ready to submit. Then play all you want. Play, that's fine. But you don't want to be in a situation where you're playing and then something goes wrong, you can't get back to where you were, and now you can't turn in your assignment, and now you're missing 12%. Did we say it was 12? You get a 0 for 12% of your grade. So, you know what I mean? You got to play it safe. Make sure you've got something in your pocket that you can turn in and you're insulated. And then you can play all you want. It's no big deal. Does that make sense? It's safe exploration. That's what I recommend highly. So anyway, so here I am. I found what I believe to be a relatively interesting shot. I already have Arnold activated because, again, if I go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Render Settings, I just make sure it's set for Arnold, and I'm good to go there. So now it's time for me to start creating rendered images. So if I go to Window, Rendering Editors, Render View. So when I open up the Render View window, this is basically the little window that shows me what it is my final image will look like. And there's a couple of little buttons here that are very helpful. This button here is Render the Current Frame. And basically what that says is, you know, whatever my camera is set up doing, please render it so I can see how that looks. So you just click on that little icon that looks sort of like a film slate that's closed. Another two icons that are very important are these two here. And this icon here is basically hang on to an image. And I use the word hang on specifically because I'm not really saving it. This is not saving, it's hanging on to it. Does that make sense? Almost like you're going through the store and you got a bunch of stuff in your cart, but you may change your mind and some of that stuff's going back. Does that make sense? I'm not saving it, but I'm hanging on to it. And then there's lose an image, and that's basically taking something back out of your cart. And you can have as many things in your cart, but when you just finally decide to save it, that's what you're actually going to get or buy. Does that make sense? Hell yeah on that? Okay, great. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over to this icon here, and we press the again, that film slate, and it's going to render the current frame. And what you'll notice is it starts rendering, and it renders from the middle and works its way out, which I'm very excited about. Rendering engines in the past did not intelligently do that because, I mean, it's such a time saver because whatever's in the middle is probably your focal point anyway, right? So let's see what we got. So I'm rendering the image out, and right away I see that's not the correct camera angle. Well, if you're rendering from the wrong camera angle and you need to stop your render, because what's happening is when you are rendering, basically all of your computer's resources are being put towards creating an image. So other stuff is like frozen, you can't access it. So what you want to do is, if you notice right away, hey, it's rendering from the wrong frame, you know, as soon as I hit the render button, I go, okay, oh, that's the wrong angle, that's not the right one. If you press the escape key, upper left-hand corner, escape will stop the render shortly thereafter, and then free up all the controls so that you can access everything again. Does that make sense? Escape gets you out of the render. Now, if you happen to be rendering from the wrong frame, and you know that, you know, because we were over here in our render settings, and we told Maya specifically to render from the render cam, right? Why is it not rendering from the render cam? Well, here's a funny thing that I've noticed about Maya last couple of versions. This film slate does not often or does not always render exactly the frame you have framed. So what I do is, if you look over here on the main interface, there's a little render current frame icon there as well. If you use the icon from the main interface, it will work. So you just have to click this one, boop, and it will start to render again. But this time you'll notice it's actually rendering from the correct camera view. Again, I don't know why recent versions of Maya have been doing that, but c'est la vie. The difference is, if you know what to look out for, it's not so bad. All right, so here we are rendering, and you can see it's making a little picture. It's working its way around the frame, slowly creating a drawing of light and shadow behavior, where it falls, drawing the geometry. And let me pan the light away from it for just a second. As much as I like to be blinded by that thing, I want you guys to see a little bit. You can see it's drawing the picture out. It's showing us what our image would actually look like. And this is something you could save. This is something you could print out, put on your refrigerator, whatever. It's making this final image. And you'll see there's a lot of information that you will get with each render as well once it's done. And you can see it takes time. And obviously the more stuff that's on the screen, the more textures that are on there, animation, all that stuff, everything starts to add up, and it adds to more time. And it looks like it's just about done. We got a little bit on the edges to do. And you can hear, can you guys hear my fan? Your fans will kick on all of a sudden because your computer is doing way more math than it's done up to this point. So all the fans have to come on to cool off the processors and the graphics cards so they don't melt. So let fans come on, it sounds like your laptop is going to take off. And incidentally, along those lines, do yourself a huge favor when you're rendering. Don't leave your laptop like on a couch or on a rug where air can't really get underneath it really well, because it gets hot quickly. And what's really nice is, you know, if you have no money, just put like books on either side so that air gets underneath it, just raise it up a tiny bit. That's always a good idea, just to keep it from overheating, because bad things can start happening when you roast your components too much. So a couple of things we can see the resolution of the image we created, what rendering engine we were using, what frame number we were rendering, but very important, render time. And you can see I'm right here at 1 minute 36 seconds to create that image. Does that make sense? Again, pretty fast by standards of anything, really. Incidentally, you guys see the first Transformers movie? Yep. Michael Bay, Optimus Prime, all that good stuff. One frame, 1/24 of a second from that movie took 40 hours to render. 40 hours for a 24th of a second. So just to give you an idea of, what we're doing compared to what Michael Bay is doing. Well, the people who are working for Michael Bay. He's just telling them what to do. But idea is it takes time to render. In fact, I refer it to as being a prisoner of the render, because once you hit the render button, until you hit escape, you can't do anything. Basically, the machine is occupied, and it should be. That's what you want it to do. All of its math, all of its resources, make a picture for me. So you want to make sure you're not doing anything else. But in terms of that rendering process, there are people who their whole job in the 3D industry is maximizing or optimizing renders so that they go faster. What can I do to make this render faster? Because obviously speed is important if we can make it look beautiful, but very quickly. That's kind of our objective. So at this point, we're up to 1 minute 36, which is not a big deal, but do pay close attention, because if you're rendering, and let's say, for whatever reason, your image is taking 10 minutes to render your final image, and your assignment is due in 3, somebody's in trouble. Does that make sense? Be very cognizant of your render times and when it's due, because you don't want to be in a situation when you can't turn something in because it's rendering. Make sense? Okay, so make sure you're keeping an eye on your render time. So I'm looking at this image and I'm thinking, okay, that's pretty cool, but you know what I'd really like to do? I'd like to kind of move that thing into that pool of light that's created by that lamp on the desk there, because I can't even really see the pepper mill so much. But I do want to do a comparison of this image to the move. So what I'm going to do is utilize this little hang on to an image icon. And what that does is just sort of saves that one so that I can take this object and move it, because I like to. It's in a new position there. And then now I'm going to render another one. And again, I click this icon here, because it's rendering more from the main interface, the correct image, than from the render view icon. So now it's rendering again, it's making another image. And when you're in the rendering process, again, one of the things that I recommend very highly is disconnect your laptop from the internet. If you're wireless, just shut it off. Turn off your screensavers, turn off hibernation. You don't want your computer doing anything but calculating out the image for you. And you don't want to be working on other files or other assignments. You really want your computer to be rendering, and that's it. That's its only job. So make sure you're doing that. And Brian, I appreciate so much that you remind me every time for that, because I'm terrible about remembering that particular thing, but it's important. Make sure you have your laptop plugged in with the external power supply, not on battery. Your laptop actually uses a different graphics card when you are not plugged in, and the reason being it's more efficient with power use, but not as good at creating nice images quickly. So make sure you got that power cord plugged in, because that makes a big difference in terms of speed and quality. So make sure you get that done. And again, you don't want to be surfing the web or whatever. Really, at this point, the render is the most important thing, and you should be doing your best to create that final image. So it's just about done here. Here's my new image, and what's cool is now that I've hung on to an image, I can use this little slider bar at the bottom and basically go between the two and see, the before after, and kind of get an idea of where I was and where I am now. and see if there's one I like better or worse or whatever. So I can do that as many times as I need to, and I can hang on to that image. And again, if I want to, I can move it again. Now, here's an interesting thing that we can do. Now, as you can see, it takes a minute and what am I at now? Again, a minute and 35 seconds for this particular render. But that's when I render the whole frame, right? So it's going to take longer to draw that whole thing. Sometimes I just want to see one little part of whatever it is I'm rendering. So here's where I can utilize one of the cool capacities of the render viewer called render region. And what I do with render region is I can literally say, you know what, I really just want to see the pepper mill. I'm not all overly worried about what's going on back here. So what I'll do is I'll come to my render view, and with my left mouse button, I'll drag and make a selection box. And it's got a red outline there. And then here's where I'm going to use this next icon over, which is render region. And if I click on that, what it'll do is just render what's in that box, which is going to be a lot faster because I don't have to deal with everything else. Does that make sense? So you can kind of ballpark what it is you really want to know about, and the rest of it doesn't matter that much. And then if you're happy with it, you can render the whole thing again. Does that make sense? Okay, so what we're talking about there is just honestly rendering workflows. How do I render in such a way that I'm being efficient? Just like we model efficiently, we animate efficiently, we rig efficiently. Everything we do is to the highest level of efficiency we can do it. So this is a rendering workflow in terms of quality. Now at this point, looking at my sampling settings, what we're sampling is we're talking about quality there. This is kind of a rough draft. It's rendering pretty quickly. It only took 19 seconds to do that little bit. But in terms of my project, when I finally decide, hey, you know what, I like this now. This is kind of cool. I like the way the light is falling off at the edges of this thing. It looks pretty nice. It's sort of, the lighting is kind of popping the object out better. I'm kind of happy with this. I think this is the final placement for the object. I like where the lights are and I'm pretty happy with it. So now I can go back and say, hey, now I need to kind of up my quality level a little bit. I don't want to do a rough draft render. What I want to do is something that looks a little bit better, if better is achievable. So here's where I'm going to go back to my render settings window. So I'm going to go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Render Settings. All right. And here's where I'm going to go to the next little tab over. The common tab is where all the instructions, like what kind of image I'm going to create and all that kind of stuff is in there. But here's where I'm going to go to the next tab over. And you'll see right up here, we've got something called Camera AA. And I'd like you to think of that like anti-aliasing or quality. What I want to do is I'd like to, if at all possible, make this image smoother, richer shadows, more quality, less sort of roughness and speckled surface. Although to be honest with you, that looks pretty good. So, but you can always shoot for better. So what I'm going to do is plug in a value here. And I chose 6. Now, the Camera AA defaults at 3, but when it comes to anything in Maya where you actually enter a value, this is advice from me to you, you want to work in halves and doubles. The reason being because if you undo in Maya, it doesn't go, oh yeah, that value used to be 3, and put a 3 back in there. Maya does not remember what it used to be. So if you work in halves and doubles, you know, I want this to have more quality, therefore doubles, I go from 3 to 6. So if 6 is not good enough or 6 doesn't make any difference, I know exactly where I was because I'm working in halves and doubles. Does that make sense? So you can always find your way back. Just again, just a suggestion on my part. So I up it to 6, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another little render here and see where we're at by increasing our Camera AA from 3 to 6. And what you'll notice is it's going to take longer, for sure. You can see it's already much slower. Yes.
So, and now my render window is gone.
Your who?
My render window is gone.
Okay, window, rendering editors, render view. Window, rendering editors, render view. Did you, yeah, I would say you may have minimized it. You may have created it. It may be part of your interface now, because sometimes if you drag a window that's floating too near to the interface, Maya goes and sucks it in, and now it's a part of the interface. So you may have to find it there.
How is it that you set up the Arnold reference?
You got to go to your plugin manager, Windows Settings and Preferences plugin manager, and make sure you activate the plugin called MTOA bundle. You put a mark next to loaded.
Windows and Preferences.
Yes, plugin manager. Yes.
So yeah, whenever I just played it today with the box around, they might
Well, you drag the create the drag box, and then you have to click the icon for the drag box. Make sure you do that. It's right next to the film slate on the render viewer window. It's the next icon over to its right. That's correct. Because if you hit the regular render button, it's going to render the whole thing again. And if you just draw the box, it's not going to do anything. So you got to tell it, please render the region that I've just selected. All right, and you can say this is obviously taking a bit longer. The first render was 1 minute 35 seconds. I doubled my quality controls, the camera AA, and it's definitely more than doubling the time. And that's what you'll find out is that the more scrutiny I'm asking Arnold and Maya to utilize, the greater the quality I'm expecting, the longer it takes. So again, more detail takes longer to draw. And like I said, that's why you're a prisoner of the render, because I can't use my machine until it's done. So sometimes I have to hit escape to wipe out the render. Now the good news is each time you render, Maya is kind of saving some information for some areas and kind of putting it in its pockets. So it's kind of a short list that it goes back to help save it sometime with each subsequent render. But you know, there's only so much Maya can shave off on its own. Now, do you think deleting history, freezing transformations, do you think any of that stuff plays into the render?
Yeah.
Oh, heck yeah. So if your render times are exceedingly long, if your renders don't look very good, one of the things you have to ask yourself is, did I clean up my scene or did I leave it all dirty and messy and I'm just hitting render and that's why I'm getting super long render times if it doesn't just crash completely every time you try to render. So again, all those goofy little things that I asked you guys to do and we were grading on, there's a real reason behind it. It's not just because we got to give you something to grade you on. Literally, they help you do your job better when you do those things. And they seem silly, but they're good foundational skills that you need in order to keep moving forward, because you're going to be deleting history, freezing transformations, and rendering stuff for the rest of your 3D career. That's going to happen. So you got to be ready. You got to be knowing what it is you need in order to be successful. So this is actually coming along pretty well. I am going to wait for the render to finish, I think, because what I want to do is hang on to the image and use my slider and go between when I did my render at a setting of 3 and when I did my render at a setting of 6, and just see how they compare to one another and see if they're actually worth it in terms of the additional wait time. Because sometimes it's not. And you kind of have to make that call. Again, what do I need this thing to do is always the question you ask yourself, even when we're doing something like rendering. You know, do I need super awesome quality? Is pretty good okay? You know, where am I at? Is this a background component? Is this the hero component? What aspect am I creating here? And therefore, what corners can I cut in the interest of speed? And what things must I have for sure, or I'm not doing my job right? Does that make sense a little bit? This is definitely a thinking man's game, so you got to make sure you got your and thinking woman's too. Got to keep your gears all moving at all times. It's it is a very demanding field. They really do expect you to keep your head on a swivel all the time. Make sure you're doing the right things that help production, not slow it. So we're rounding the corner here. Any guesses? What do you guys think? How many minutes do you think this is going to take? What do you guys think? 6 minutes? 6.5? 6 online. What do you? 8. I got 8 in the middle.
7.
7, and we got a 7. All right, we'll see what.
Yeah, it says forever.
It seems like that, doesn't it? That's what I mean, like being a prisoner of the render. I can't do anything until it's done. So it looks like it's buttoning up the last little bit here, and the winner is 8. Ooh, looks like 6 minutes and 30 seconds. Let me see. 6:22. I had a 6.5. Who gave me 6.5? Ah, you were very good. 6.5 minutes. So you can see I doubled my value, right, in terms of my camera, but it way more than doubled the time. So now I've got this new image. Let's see how it compares to my settings when it was at 3. So I'm going to hang on to this image. Boop. And now I can go between them. Here's 3, and here's 6. 3, 6, 3, 6, 3, 6. You guys see a difference at all?
No.
3, 6, 3, 6. Now, in terms of where would I look for difference? Because you might be like, it's a peppermill. Where you're going to have to do is look in the shadow areas. Look at the shadows that are being cast on the object. Look at the edges of the shadows. And those are the areas, and wherever the light strikes, of course, you want to see nice, smooth lighting. Those are the areas that are going to be the giveaway as to, you know, is there any difference in the quality? And for me, looking at this, I really don't see a difference between 3 and 6. I mean, they're virtually identical. So what I would say in this instance is, if I'm rendering a project that's, you know, 375 frames long, and that isn't even close to implausible. If I'm rendering something that long, I'm going to set it for 3, not 6, because it looks just as good. Does that make sense? On a per frame basis. So I'm not going to get in any trouble. That will still be sufficient quality. So once I'm happy with my image, now I decide, you know what, here's where I really want to save it. So this is where I move forward into saving an image. The steps for saving the image, very simple. Within the render viewer, just go to File, Save Image. And then what you'll see is it's going to send it to the images folder of the project you've set your project to. So if you haven't set your project, who knows where this image is going? So again, great idea, set your project. It saves you so much time and trouble. Very, very important for you guys to understand. In terms of the images, you could save it in a wide variety of image types. And if you scroll, they've got them alphabetically listed. There's a bunch of them in here. For our class and our assignment, we are saving everything as a TIFF file. So make sure you choose TIFF, because if you save your file, if you save your image as any other file type, JPEG, Targa, PNG, EXR, that's the default. I'll know you didn't change anything. If you save it as any other file type, you get a 0 for your render. Does that make sense? I got everybody's attention on that one? 0. So make sure you render the correct image type. You don't want to miss that. That's bad on the good bad scale. Now you might be wondering, why TIFF? Does it make a difference? There are many different image types. You know, like I said, TIFF, Targa, JPEG. There's a bunch of varieties of different file types. And each file has its pros and cons in terms of what it can do. Some of them support transparency. Some of them support alpha channels. They all do different things. What I like about TIFFs is 2 things. Number 1, it's a very good quality image with very little compression. JPEGs are low quality images with a lot of compression. That's why they're pretty cruddy. I like TIFFs, again, good quality image, very little compression to the image. Also, what's really nice is you have to think of image types as like languages. And the way it works is, where is this image going after this? What application, for example, is it going to be composited in, right? Because after we're done with our work and we create images, we give all this stuff to the compositor, and it's their job to do the real wizardry and make this stuff look awesome. So what you have to ask yourself again is, well, what's the next step for this thing? What application is it going into? Because applications like or speak certain languages and don't like and don't speak other languages. So if the application that your images are going to go into understands both JPEG and TIFF, and it doesn't understand PNG, doesn't want to work with Targa, which one of those do you think you would use? Utter silence. JPEG versus TIFF? TIFF, definitely. Again, better quality image than the JPEG. So even though this particular application understands both of those image types, one is better quality. So typically when you create a project, you will be given specific technical parameters, and they will tell you, you must give me a TIFF file when you create this image, because where it's going after this, it needs TIFFs. Does that make sense? So if you render JPEGs or you give them an EXR, that's not what they asked for. It doesn't help them do their job. It's the same as if you didn't do it. Does that make sense? So that's why technical parameters for assignments, again, who cares? It looks like a dragon. No, it's actually a huge deal. Yes, you made a great dragon, but if you submit work to an employer and it's the wrong thing, it's not what they need, it's the same as if you didn't do it. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to get you guys to understand. Technical parameters are very specific and they're important. You've got to follow what you're asked to do. That's like the given. You must do exactly what they ask for. And I know they seem like insignificant details, but they're actually of the utmost importance. Does that make sense a little bit? Okay, just want to make sure you understand. So for this assignment, for our class, I want TIFFs. So make sure that's what you give me, because anything else gets a 0 for the render. And you don't want to do that. That's a big bummer. Because I like to give 100s. How about you, Brian? I love 100s. That's my favorite grade to give. Actually, give is a misnomer. That is, it is cool. It makes you feel good when you can give a 100. But I don't just hand them out. You got to earn those for sure. But point being, I hate zeros. Nothing bums me out more than having to give somebody a 0 for something. So please don't do that. For you and me. All right. So when you create the right image type, again, it's going to be a TIFF. So make sure you select it from the drop down. You do need to scroll. There are many types. They are alphabetical. T is towards the end of the alphabet. Keep going down. And then, of course, you want to name your image. And, of course, you're going to use the same naming convention that we've been using all month long to name that image. And this is my lecture 10 render activity 3DF 1805, and then you hit save. And of course you can see it's going to go to the images folder, so I hit save. And if I go to my images folder, if I go to my images folder, there we go. And I go to my images folder, there's my image. And then this can be printed out. It can be put on a Facebook page or something or whatever. It's ready to go now. I've done my job. Does that make sense? So if you were able to do this activity, you have a tremendous leg up on your week 4 assignment 2, because that's what you're going to be doing. It's a separate scene. There's no Peppermill in it, but you're going to put 4 objects that you built this month inside of that scene. You can arrange them any way you wish. You can move the camera anywhere you wish to create nice composition, and we'll talk about composition next class. But that's how you'll create that final image that you'll be graded on. We'll talk a little bit more about that next class, but incidentally, when you do that final turn-in for week 4 assignment 2, I get both an image and a Maya file. Don't give me just an image, because you're missing half of the work. Don't give me just a Maya file, you're missing half of the work and the most important part, right? Why do we do this? to create an image. Pretty rectangles. That's our job. We make pretty rectangles, whether they're moving or stationary. Make sense? Hell yeah?
Hell yeah.
Okay. Everybody have good success with this activity? Again, not overly complicated, but there's enough steps. You got to make sure you got them all, or it gets frustrating. All right. So, are there any questions about this particular activity? Yes. Oh, go ahead.
Whenever you said that it doesn't do it to the right perspective when you're in the render viewer,
Yes.
you clicked an icon.
Yes, it's the same icon. If you look on your main interface, you'll see there's a render current view or current frame icon here, and it looks just like the one on the render viewer. So just, I use this one, but well, probably because your copy of Maya is either compressed or you just close that area down, just restore Maya to its default settings and it'll appear again. But you do have that icon, so you shouldn't have any trouble with that. But just, I don't know, I've just noticed that sometimes these periphery windows that are created don't work as well as the main interface in some instances. And I don't know why that is, but it's just a Maya thing. So whenever there's an icon on the main interface that's the same as somewhere else, if all craziness is happening, I just use the main interface icons. For some reason, they have a higher level of success. Yes. I'm going to keep it a secret. No. Yes. Sure. No, I can show you that. Here's what Alden is asking about. Because sometimes when you're getting near to an object, you see how it kind of seems to disappear. It looks like it's melting away like the Invisible Man, right? My goodness, that's like Kevin Bacon. So what's going on there? Why is that happening? And how do I fix that? Because it's probably not good. Well, the good news is your geometry is not disintegrating, so everything is okay. But what you are experiencing is an issue with the settings for your near clipping plane. Now, the way this works is every camera has a near clipping plane and a far clipping plane. And it's kind of like being nearsighted or farsighted. But cameras are kind of both. They can see between the near clipping plane and the far clipping plane. They can't see things that are outside of the far clipping plane, and they can't see things that are nearer than the near clipping plane. So if this is my clipping plane, I can't see my desk camera there. So I keep moving forward, and as soon as the camera's inside of my far clipping plane, oh, there's the camera, awesome, yay, hi camera. But then once I get too close, now I can't see it again. It's almost as if it disappeared. So what you have to do is make an adjustment to the clipping plane settings. Did you? Probably, and my little heart beating. So what you want to do is within whatever camera is giving you that issue, and I'll give myself a little bit of that issue, if you go to View, Select Camera, now the camera is selected, and then what you want to do is open up your attribute editor, because there's a lot more information in the attribute editor, and you'll see you've got a, let's see, where's my near clipping plane and my far clipping? There it is, right here. Near clipping plane and far clipping plane. So what I'm going to do is change my near clipping plane to a very small number, like 0.01. Now I can get much closer to this object without it disappearing on me. Does that make sense? And I'm just making an adjustment to the clipping plane. Similarly, if you can't see objects that are very far away, if you move your far clipping plane way out, you'll be able to see those as well. And again, all of this affects the hardware render time, because if you're asking Maya to draw more space, it's going to take longer to do it. So it's somewhat constricted in the interest of being able to maintain real-time drawing, or what we perceive as real-time. No worries. All right. Anything else? Those are some good questions. I usually have more questions though. No? You guys got this? Were you working on something else? Were you working on something else in class? Make sure you unlock the camera, because if it's not moving, you didn't unlock it. Is that the problem?
No.
Okay.
I already set up my camera, I already set up my update, I'm gonna make the camera take a picture of it.
Using the render, if you open up, go to Window, Rendering Editors, Render View, and then click the film slate icon on there in the way left upper corner. All right.
Use, render region, and it renders everything. How do I make it focus on just that area? So I can use the frame with just that.
Well, the question was, if I'm using the render region function, how do I render just what's in that region? All you have to do is click the render region icon, which is right next to the render.
I already did that, but I didn't want everything else in the background.
Yeah, that's all it's going to render. If you click that icon, it's only going to render what is in that region, whatever you've selected. So just make sure when you're doing that, you're hitting this icon here, not that icon there. Because this is render everybody. This is render whatever's in the box. Does that make sense? And there's definitely a distinct difference there. Now, when you're all done with that, of course, you can close your viewer. And make sure you got all that stuff rendered. Now, before I let you go, because oddly enough, you guys don't have a lot of questions today, I want to take a look at the self-grade document for week 3, because I know how much you guys love to talk about the self-grade document. I get emails all the time. Hey, Steve, can we talk about the self-grade document? It makes me so happy. So here we are at week 3. And in terms of the things we're looking for, you can see the list is getting longer, right? Week 1, there wasn't that many things. Week 2, we saw a pretty good jump. Week 3, more. So the things that we did week 1 are still there. The things we did week 2 are still there. We've just added some things. So in terms of things that we've added, edge quality, right? Who can tell me what edge quality is? What's that? No, you're getting there. Yep, you're talking about how surfaces come together and the transition that takes place, how rounded or smooth these surfaces are, because faces or surfaces don't come together at 90 degrees. That just doesn't happen in reality, as far as we know. Everything's got rounding to it to a certain degree. Now, how can I incorporate edge quality into my models? Bevel tool. So if you see edge quality, bevel tool is what should ring out in your head. So make sure when you're done with your models, look at the edges of this thing and ask yourself, do I have any 90-degree angles? I should probably run the bevel tool on that. Again, it's something you do at the end to kind of sand the corners off and make it like you won't hurt anybody with it. So edge quality, bevel tool. Make sure you do that. Again, it's a sizable amount of your grade. You don't want to be missing that. And it's easy to do, so please do it. Silhouette and form, we've been doing that since the very beginning. You know, what we're talking about there is shape, silhouette, what the object looks like in 2D. Do I recognize it for what it is from its silhouette? Form is 3D detail, depth-related detail. Not for shape, because shape is a 2D concept. I should be able to tell exactly what it is you've made by just looking at its shadowy outline. I don't need to move it at all. When I'm looking at form, that's where I'm going to start moving around the object. And, you know, form is, well, there's some grooves in there. Do you have the grooves in there? There's an indentation in the object for a screw to go into. Do you have the indentation and the screw, or did you just make the screw and stick it in there? Does that make sense? Form details. So that's where we're talking about depth-related detail. Good question to ask. All right. So then we move up. What are we into? Oh, clean geometry. So in your head, what tool helps you with that? Cleanup tool. So you've got to make sure you run the cleanup tool on the stuff you've built this month. that make sense? Or this week. So whatever you're turning in for week 3 turn in, we're going to be running the cleanup tool on it because I'm going to be running the cleanup tool on it when I'm grading it. So again, points you don't want to miss. You're trying to avoid n-gons like the plague. Triangles here and there are okay. I don't want triangles everywhere. Can anybody tell me what's the most important setting on the cleanup tool? Right at the beginning when you first open it, what is the thing you have to make sure you do? Actually, his hand was up first. Select the matching polygons, not clean up, because it defaults to clean up, which means you're telling Maya to fix it. And that is the worst thing you could do. You don't want Maya fixing anything. Set it for select. Show me the problem. I'll fix it. I can't tell you how many models I get covered with triangles because they forgot to turn that off and Maya triangulated everything. So that ruins your edge flow, and then that would kill your edge looping and topology points. So don't do that. Make sure you fix that, because otherwise you're going to lose out on both.
Say you have something geometry that, like the job you were doing, this geometry would make it couldn't have any triangles, but how your project came out, while he was fixing it, the only way to do it was to input a triangle.
Well, if the parameters of the turn-in, you know, whatever job you're working on, let's say you were building an asset that was going to go into a game engine that absolutely will not calculate triangles. I've never heard of that, such a thing, but let's just say those are the parameters, because you know, who knows? But if it is stated everything has to have 4 sides, then everything's got to have 4 sides. But what I would say is something that you can do is in the instance that it's asking for 4 sides and you need a triangular shape, you know, what's to say you don't make something that looks like that? Does that make sense? It is 4-sided ever so slightly, but technically yes. And that's what matters is the math. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, you know, you got to think of it like you're playing a game. These are the rules for the game. And your options are success or failure. There's no middle ground. So you got to do what they ask for. And again, like I said, it's a thinking person's game, this line of work. You really have to think about stuff. You can't just disengage your brain and just go. It doesn't work like that because we're creating art with math and we're using that art in other devices that use math. So we really have to think about how these things affect each other because we're all part of the same CG pipeline and we got to work together. It's a good question though. I like it. All right, so clean geometry, asset built-in parts. I got a couple of emails, not too many, but I got some emails from students who said, oh, well, I built my asset in parts. What do you mean I didn't get those points? Well, it's not, did you make it in parts? It's, did you make it in the right number of parts? And our criteria are, look for separate materials. If it's a separate material, it's a separate part. If it needs to move, then that's got to be a separate part. If the real thing was made in separate parts, it's got to be separate parts. So it's not just, well, it says build it in parts. Mine is not made of one piece of geometry, therefore success. No, it's how many parts should it be made of? And that, again, thinking about what you need. So make sure you're looking very closely at the reference images and making sure you know how many pieces each of those objects are made of. And if you're not sure, remember we told you we gave you a document, right? The parts guideline, which lists every object and a good ballpark number for how many pieces these things should be made of. So make sure you're using that. If you make a part that's the wrong part? Yes. I'm not sure I understand your question. Try me again. Yes.
I didn't know the top could come off.
Oh, yeah.
I made the, I guess the socket where the gumball actually come out. I made that. So
Right.
you get parts taken off.
Yes, absolutely. Because the gumball machine, if you look at it, number one, the lid, the top part, right, definitely comes off because that's a red piece of plastic. The fishbowl, that's another piece because it's clear. It's a separate piece of plastic. The body is a separate piece of plastic. And that part that you twist and the gumballs would come out, that's all part of that same main body. That's just painted. That's not a separate entity. That literally comes right out of the object because it was form created. In addition to which, the gumball machine is two pieces of plastic screwed together. So not only is that one piece for the body, it's actually two pieces held together by screws. And that's why I say you've got to pay very close attention. Look at those reference images and study them. They're literally, the information is there, but you got to take your time and look. This is not a, oh shoot, I got to hurry up kind of thing. You have to work quickly and efficiently, but not at the expense of doing your job wrong. Does that make sense? So it's tricky. I will tell you that straight up. This is not an easy line of work, but that's why not everybody does it, and the pay is pretty good. You know, if this was super easy and anybody could do it, the pay would be terrible and there wouldn't be any jobs really. This is hard work. This is demanding work. This is highly competitive work. Therefore, you're in for the fight of your life to try to win a job in this field. But the pay is pretty good. And to be honest with you, if I have a choice making the same pay salary doing something that's not even remotely fun, I would much rather do this. Does that make sense? So, and that's the call you have to make. For everyone, it's different. You know, for you, you might agree with me and say, you know what, at half the salary, I'd still rather be doing this because this is what makes me happy. And that's what you should do, is what makes you happy. But if you look at this and you go, well, I can make the same money, you know, flipping pizzas, I don't really care. Okay, then go flip pizzas if the hours are better. You know what I mean? That's a decision you have to make. And that's something you'll have to do your whole life long. That's not even just for this field. You will always be weighing the pros and the cons of every job you have. And you're looking for the pros that you must have and the cons you can live with. And that's how you determine what's right for you. Does that make sense? Okay. Me to you advice. No charge. One to grow on. Make yourself happy. I know a lot of people who make a lot of money and are miserable. They hate their jobs. They loathe them. They go in there every day miserable. I really like my job a lot. And honestly, I recommend it highly. Anybody else? We good? Okay, good. Let's go back to edge looping and topology. Again, the idea of neat and clean edge looping, efficiently describing shape and form. Again, not messy, erratic edge looping. Grouping and pivots. Remember, we got to attach this stuff to each other, create a hierarchy, put the pivot points in the right place so that the objects work, right? If I'm making scissors, they have to pivot in the middle of the blades, right? Or they're not scissors. So make sure you get those pivot points in the right place. Transformations frozen, history deleted. Those are like 2-click items. Click, 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 it's done. But we must delete the history on our geometry, and we must freeze the transformations, because that is basically house cleaning. And again, minimizing the amount of math that Maya has to do. And then Maya makes our job easier. Yes? Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Freeze them. And make sure you go to the group nodes and freeze those, because you can put transformations on those as well. So if you have created a hierarchy, make sure you go through the hierarchy and make sure everything is frozen, because it has to be. So there is a diligence to this line of work. And it's not hard. You just got to know what you're looking for and make sure you got the time to do it. Yeah. Right. So you got to make sure you name your geometry. Every piece of geometry. Well, what you have to remember is when you name things, you can't leave the default name in there. So if you copied and pasted your geometry or whatever, and you named it, but I still see P cylinder 1 in there, that's the problem. They cannot have that default. Make sure you name it in the shape node, right? And that's at the top of the channel box. So name it a new name there, because that's what's critical. Because if you think about it, remember the Captain Idaho assignment, the build me? The first little thing we did, that would have been just short of a living hell if every piece in there was named PQ1, PQ37, you know, where's the nose? I need the outliner, right? If I've got all default names, I can't find anything. And again, that goes back to the idea that I'm going to hand this off to somebody else on the CG production pipeline, and heaven help somebody who's got to rig this thing if every piece is called P cube something, because they're going to hate you for that. And to be honest with you, they'll probably send it back. Dude, name your stuff. And you better believe he's going to tell his supervisor or her supervisor, hey, I'd have gotten on that project already, but the guy who sent it to me didn't name anything. And it was taking me forever, so I sent it back to him. So they come find you. Does that make sense? So we keep our end neat and clean. Layers, make sure you've got layers and make sure the layers work. I can't stress that enough. You've got to name the layer and make sure it's functional. There should be one layer for every object that you put into the scene. So if you are turning in 5 objects, there will be 5 layers in addition to the layer that the columns are on. So make sure that that's the case. Name the assets, that's what we were just talking about. Make sure there's no default naming in there whatsoever, only the names you've given it. Put it into wireframe, we've talked about that. Name the file properly. Again, we have a naming convention that we use. The whole school uses it, so you might as well learn it. And I literally tell you exactly what to name it at the end of each thing. So to miss it is showing me that you're not reading the assignment. So don't miss that. Those are easy points. So get all of the easy ones. Miss out on the hard ones if you have to. But of critical importance, make sure you are on the correct tab, because this is your week 3 turn-in. So make sure you've got the week 3 tab selected. And guess what? Week 4 is what's due shortly thereafter. Make sure you go to that tab when you're doing your week 4 assignment 1 and your week 4 assignment 2. 1, you'll be UV mapping objects that you built. 2, you will be bringing objects into a scene and rendering it just like we did today. So if you had success today, you're going to do terrific with week 4 assignment 2. And honestly, that's why I like to do that assignment in class together, because then I know you can do it and you know you can do it, because let's face it, we don't have much time left. We've only got 1 more class and it's over again. It's crazy how fast this goes. Does it feel like a month to you guys?
Nope.
Like a week and a half maybe, right? And it's over. You guys are going to be in model creation next week.
Or R1 for those who are on the.
Or Art 1, yeah. So it'll be over fast. It goes crazy fast. And again, what I would ask you to do is take a look at how quickly this went by and realize that's how this school works. Your whole time here will go by that fast. So make sure you're making good use of your time here. Work really hard. Communicate with your instructors. Have them review your work. You're not going to have the kind of passionate individuals who are great artists and great teachers who want to help you at your disposal like you have here. And when you're not here anymore, you'll miss it. So make sure you make good use of the time here. It goes faster than you think. You will be shocked. And as telling Brian, I don't think a day goes by where I don't see a student in the hallway who's like, holy cow, I feel like I was in your class yesterday and I'm graduating. So it happens faster than you think. So make good use of your time. It's important. Not always is this opportunity available. All righty. Well, that's all I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to make sure we got into that self-grade because there's stuff due tonight. So be busy, model lots of cool stuff. I recommend doing the Lego person. That's not too bad. That's a level 3 asset, but it's not that hard. So that's a better one to kind of invest your time in. What's that? It's a fair number of parts, but the good news is once you've built one, everything duplicates. So, you know, you just got to make one arm, one leg, the torso, the hips, and the head, and one hand. You're good. So not too bad in terms of the assets you could choose from to do. And it's fun anyway. Everybody loves to make the Lego guy. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. I will see you on Thursday, and it will be the last class. Yeah, it happens. Every month it happens. But I'll see you guys then, and we will talk about composition. The highly criticized and seldom discussed composition. Goodbye, my digital friends.